All right, so now let's see what else we can learn from our monopoly curves. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to reintroduce the marginal cost curve. So you may remember that we derived the supply curve from the marginal cost curve. Here we're just calling it marginal cost curve. And we'll talk about exactly why that is in just a minute. But why are we calling it the supply curve or marginal cost? Why are we calling it supply? Well, remember, it's all about just about the definition. Okay, so the definition of the supply curve says the quantity that firms supply at a given price. Well, that might not be true anymore, because as monopolists, monopolists are price makers. Okay, so they actually determine the price themselves. They choose the amount of quantity that's in the market in order to choose the price. So our definition doesn't quite fit the definition of what a supply curve is. So that's why we were reverting back to calling it the marginal cost curve. Now, exactly where is the quantity that a monopolist is going to produce? Well, I kind of already have it on here, but let's try to figure out exactly why that's the case, right? So specifically, we can say that we will have the monopolist choose to produce where marginal cost and marginal revenue equal each other. Okay, so that happens right here. So we just go down to the x-axis and see, well, that's here. Okay, so it's going to be where marginal cost and marginal revenue equal each other. So we have to ask ourselves, if we want to remember this, we need to ask ourselves, why is that the case? And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say, well, what if it wasn't the case? Okay, so let's assume first that maybe we're right here. Okay, so maybe we're producing some amount there. Well, if we're producing here, and we go up, we see at this quantity, marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue. So in other words, if we want to produce another unit, it's going to cost us more to produce that unit than we're going to get in revenue. That's bad. We should not do that. So we should not be producing any amount greater than this QM where they're the same. Let's assume that we're less than that amount. Okay, let's assume we're over here. Well, at here, marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. In other words, we're getting more in revenue than we would be paying in terms of cost for producing the next unit. So we should produce that next unit, right? And if we do produce that next unit, well, then we're not going to be here anymore. We'll be here. And then that's still going to be the same, so we're not going to be there anymore. We're going to be here. We're going to keep inching up until we get here, where they're the same. And there's no incentive to keep going after that, as we saw. Okay, but here's the thing. Before, when we were, let's switch this. Before we were finding our equilibrium price, so we had this demand, we've got the supply, we've got this is price, this is quantity. So before what we did, we just found where those two things were equal, and we said, well, this is our quantity and this is our price. Okay, and they're both just where they intersect. Here it's not quite the same. Okay, so here they're going to intersect here, and we're going to get our quantity. But there's a second step here, because this price here, this marginal revenue M price here, that price is not what people are willing to pay at that quantity. People are willing to pay up at the demand curve. This is how much people are willing to pay. So by kind of making this market a little bit more scarce as far as the goods that are being produced, they're able to raise the price. So actually this PM here, that is actually going to be the price that monopolists will charge, and as we notice here, that's going to be a greater price than where marginal cost equals demand, which we say is the socially optimal price. Okay, so assuming there's no externalities, and this would be our Q star. Okay, but we're going to be producing less than that Q star, and we're going to be charging a higher price than would be. Our price would be somewhere right about here if we were being socially optimal, but we're charging a higher price, and we're able to charge that higher price because we have a smaller quantity. Okay, so let's add another curve in here. We should remember the average total cost curve. So if you don't remember the average total cost curve, go back and review your supply lecture. And it is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's just the average total cost, where that equals the total cost over the amount that we're averaging, the actual quantity. Okay, so average total cost is equal to total cost over Q, quantity. Okay, so why are we adding this back in? Well, it turns out this is going to make it a lot easier for us to calculate profit visually. Okay, so we should remember that profit, I'm just going to call that pi here, is equal to the revenue minus cost. Okay, so if we, like we said before, if we've got our average total cost, and that's equal to total cost times quantity, or excuse me, over quantity, then if I need this total cost as part of the calculation of profit, then, well, I've got this formula here. I just have to solve for total cost. So what I can do is I can just multiply both sides by Q. That's going to cancel there. And so I've got average total cost times Q is equal to total cost. Okay, and these are all at some level of quantity. So our quantity is QM. So what is our average total cost for the monopolist? Well, we're just gonna go up from this QM until we hit the average total cost curve, and we're gonna say this is the average total cost. Okay, so you notice that both things that make up this total cost, the average total cost, and the Q are what we have labeled here. So this is our Q, this is our average total cost at that Q. So if we multiply those two things by each other, we get our total cost. So geometrically speaking, if we thought of this as length and this times width, then length times width, we're getting this area here. So this area is our total cost. Okay? And so that's what that is right there. So in order for us to find out profit, we got to find out what our total revenue is. Well, remember revenue is just price times quantity. Okay? We know what our quantity is here. It's just going to be, again, oops, let's go back. It's just going to be this thing over here again. And we know what our monopolist price is. We just went over on how to get that. So let me change colors here. Let's do pink. Why not? All right, so this is our price, and this is our quantity. So again, if we're doing length times width here to find this revenue, what's going to be this? Okay, so it turns out then that, oops, that's not what I wanted. It turns out then, I need to get some more pins on here, that the difference between this revenue, this pink area, and the blue shaded area, this square here, well, that's just going to be revenue minus cost. Okay, so that's how we can calculate profit. We could just find the area of this thing. Alternately, we could find the area of revenue and subtract off the area of the cost, but that's one more step. If we could just figure out what the area of this little thing is right here, then that would just figure out what our profit was. Also notice that, as I mentioned, if we were at marginal cost equals demand, so in other words, the socially optimal place, we'd be right here. So we're producing less than that. We're producing less than the optimal amount. Why is that a problem? Well, you can probably tell where I'm going at this point in the class, right? There's this area of people that is not an area of transactions, rather, not necessarily a lot of people, could be one person, but area of transactions that are not taking place. We would have these transactions taking place, and we'd be getting some surplus, some consumer surplus, and some producer surplus added if we were producing at this Q star, but that's not happening. We're producing less than that. Okay, so because of that, this area that I have put a nice triangle around is some potential surplus that we're not picking up. Okay, again, just like we saw with other market failures when we had our externalities, we're going to see a dead weight loss. Okay, and of course, how do we calculate a dead weight loss? It's the same way we have always calculated a dead weight loss: 1/2 base times height. Okay. So I'd like to compare real quick profit with consumer surplus. So we're always talking about consumer surplus being this good thing for consumers, or excuse me, for producers. But how do we really compare that with what we should be trying to think about maximizing in profit? And we see that profit makes up part of the producer surplus. But what is this rest of the stuff? Well, when we're talking about it says consumer surplus. That's why I was confused. That should be producer surplus. So if we're comparing producer surplus with profit, what we're not taking into account when we're talking about producer surplus is fixed costs. Okay, so this kind of ignores the fixed costs, whereas profit takes into account both fixed cost and variable cost, because we're thinking about the average total cost. Okay, average total cost, so it's including fixed costs and variable costs, whereas marginal cost being the supply curve. So when we're thinking about the producer surplus, what the supply curve is coming from is the marginal cost, and where's that coming from? It's coming from changes in overall cost, which is driven by variable costs. So it's thinking about the variable cost. It's not thinking about the total cost. So that's really the main difference between the profit and producer surplus. All right. So what in the world should we do about this? Should we regulate? If we do regulate, how should we do it? This first thing, well, how about zero profit? So how first of all, how can we even do that? Well, if we go back here and we look at what profit is, let me try to erase some of this stuff around here and make it a little bit cleaner. So if we look at what profit is, as far as its geometric properties here, its length times width, right? So we got this side and we've got this side. So if we wanted profit to equal 0, then we would have to make quantity go down to 0. So we need to move that way so that amount is 0. Or we'd have to make sure that the distance between the price and the average total cost is 0. Okay, so we'd have to set the price somewhere equal to the average total cost at some quantity, right? So we could do that. How about if we decided to set it at the efficient price? Okay, so in this example, we've got this flat marginal cost curve. The efficient price, therefore, is going to be 20 cents, right? So 20 cents is where this marginal cost curve equals demand. Now, if the mechanism that we use to get it to that price is, well, you're going to have to sell it for this price, and you're going to sell it at this quantity as well. If they've got to sell it at that quantity, then you notice that the price is below the average total cost curve. So this would actually be negative profit for this particular firm. So that's not something that we'd be too interested in doing. Okay. We won't worry about this part for the subsidy real quick. Let's think a little bit more about this zero profit thing. I want to go circle back around onto that. So if we wanted to set a point such that there was zero profit, well, maybe what we could do is we could say, well, you got to produce, here. Let's just say that they have to produce at some point where the average total cost curve equals the demand curve. Okay, so that will give us a price of what? This would be 25 cents, and so you got to produce 600. Okay, so that would make zero profit, sure, but another thing that could happen though, and let's remember this looks like it's kind of bowing out, right? So what would happen if we actually had two intersections of the average total cost curve, and the demand curve. So what would happen in that case? Well, we would try not to choose this one, I would think, right? And the reason we would try not to choose that one is because this quantity, if we go down here, this quantity is going to be around 100. Well, that's even less than we would be getting in the monopolist, where this marginal cost and marginal revenue curves equal. They're producing 300 there. So our deadweight loss is going to be even bigger. So we're going to be even further away than from the 650 that we would be ideally producing it. So we would not choose that one for that reason. We would choose this one. Okay. All right. So what comes with monopoly power? One thing that comes with that is what's called price discrimination. So that's basically when you can charge different people different prices. Okay, and generally you need to have some form of market power and able to pull this off. Okay, so you also need to have differences in price elasticity of demand. In other words, you've got to have people that are willing to pay different groups, different amounts for the good, and you're able to charge those that value this good a higher price, and you're able to charge those that value the good at a lower price price. So you also should be able to prevent resale. That would be a problem if you could resell the good. How do people do that? Well, services is pretty easy. It's hard to resell someone's work they did on your lawn that week. You could have a time limit, so you could say, well, this is only good if the product's bought at a certain time. You could require photo cards, ID, or have some sort of electronic protection. So, for example, goods that are sold online, it's really hard to resell a product that you downloaded. You've also got to have, as I said, market power to do such things. Okay, so what are the different types of price discrimination? Well, first degree is what we call perfect price discrimination. That's where you're able to charge each consumer exactly the amount that they value the good. This is really hard to do, obviously. How in the world is this monopolist going to know exactly how much you value it? It's really hard to do. But if you're able to do that, then you're able to extract all the consumer surplus from the consumers and make that all producer surplus. We've got second degree, which is when the monopolist has incomplete information. It knows it's different types of consumers and knows their taste, but can't tell them apart. Okay, so they have to use some sort of self-selection in order to set the right price or quantity. So we might see things like this with maybe bulk pricing, something like that. Third degree, so monopolists can separate the markets. Okay, so you've probably seen a lot of this before. If you've ever used, for example, your student ID to get into the movies and pay it for a cheaper price. So that's the third degree. You have something that can prove who you are, and you can get a lower price for. So senior citizen discounts, military discounts, teachers, for example, sometimes get reduced prices on food. There's industry nights. So if you're a server, you can get a cheaper food. So you have some sort of way that you can signal who you are and give it your different prices. Okay, so let's talk about these a little bit more in detail. So the first one, again, this was the one we called perfect price discrimination. Again, we said this is very hard to do. I mean, obviously that's going to be hard to do. How in the world are you going to be able to pull this off? Knowing exactly how much all your customers exactly value your good, right? You can't just ask them how much they value it. They've got some incentive to not tell you the truth, right? So it's a tough one to do. But if you are able to pull something like this off, theoretically you can convert all of their consumer surplus to producer surplus. Okay, so it looks something like this. So I don't really like these graphs actually, so let me just draw this out. So let's say we've got some marginal cost, and let's say we got some demand curve. Okay, so let's say it's made up of individual. This demand curve is made up of a bunch of individuals. Let's say individual I is over here. He's willing to pay. Let's say this is $5. Okay, so if he's willing to pay, for that one unit, he's willing to pay $5. You charge him $5. Okay, you get every single bit of his valuation. He doesn't get any surplus because you have taken all that surplus away. He gets charged exactly his valuation. So there's nothing he gains as far as utility from entering that market. So you kind of get all that. Okay, same thing down here. Let's say this is $4, and some other person is willing to buy this other good. So this is B2. Okay, and you do the same thing there. You know exactly how much they value it at. You charge them that $4. Okay, so they don't get any surplus, but you get to charge them this excess price, right? So you get to capture all that. Okay, so this goes on, and you actually completely capture all the surplus. Okay, but what's interesting about this is you're going to have the incentive to do so up until this point where marginal cost equals demand. Well, that's the efficient price. So if we're going to look into the bright side of things, at least there's no loss in surplus. There's no deadweight loss when we are able to first degree price discriminate. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much what we just went over. So second degree, again, this is just kind of volume discount. So selling blocks of goods. Could be other ways you can self-select, such as standby tickets, peak and off-peak pricing. So if you have chosen your electric company, and some of them may have peak and off-peak pricing, so based on the time of day, how much you're using, they might charge you different rates, things like that. Okay, and we'll skip past that. And third degree, again, this is the one you should be most familiar with if you've used your student discount for anything to get a discount of the movies or something like that, right? Or if you've gotten any coupons that say valid at this location only. So why would that count? Well, maybe people in different areas of town have different abilities to pay, right? So if you've got something that is valid at only one location, then maybe people that are around that location have different, maybe lower abilities to pay, and so they want them to still be able to come in and give them money, right? Okay. All right. So, yeah. So that's essentially what's happening here. Is for this third degree is you've got this inelastic submarket and this elastic submarket. So for us thinking about the movie ticket example, okay. So you've got an elastic submarket, that would be students, okay, and you've got an inelastic submarket, that's people that make a good bit more money than students, so everyone else. Okay, and so by charging different prices, okay, so we've got this price A, this is higher price for everyone else, and you got price B, you've gotten this student discount. So by doing this, by charging both of them these individual profits, we actually would get a combination of this profit and this profit, which is greater than the old profit that we would get if we just charged everyone the same price. Okay? And really quick, I'm not going to do too much with this. I just kind of want you to know what this is. And this is something that's very similar. It has a lot of things in common with price discrimination, but depending on your definition of price discrimination may or may not actually fit in there. But we won't talk about this too much. But this is what's called a two-part tariff. And a two-part tariff is basically when you have to pay for some sort of entry, but then you pay for a fairly lower price after that. For essentially we would pay the marginal cost after that. All right, so for example, you pay for a membership to Costco or Sam's Club. If you want to go to a fair, you pay for entry to the fair a lot of the time. Of course, they can price discriminate with that too. And then maybe you'll pay for the tickets for your rides afterwards. How about a taxi or Uber, right? So you're going to pay a minimum price to get started, maybe $5, and then you'll pay an amount for the each mile afterwards. How about razors? You might buy the actual stick for the razor, but you'll buy the heads for the razor separately, right? So these sorts of things, these are two-part tariffs, okay? And so it kind of works very similar to first degree and what it's able to extract. So basically, you charge someone an amount equal to their entire consumer surplus for the entry. So you get all of that. So that's your charge for the entry. And then everything after that, the quantity, you charge the marginal cost after that. Okay, and so you've been able to completely extract their consumer surplus. So that's kind of neat, I guess, is the way to say that. And again, this next stuff, I just kind of want you to know about it. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm going to skip past some of this stuff. So this basically is called collusion and cartel. So what's collusion? That's basically when groups get together and they try to suppress competition. And cartels collude. They basically they coordinate their activities. So we might have heard of OPEC coming together and being in the oil industry and reducing the supply, kind of like they were a big monopoly. We saw recently an alliance between Russia and Saudi Arabia kind of dissolve, and they went to a price war. But prior, they had been together, working together. So why would they do this? Well, they can charge monopoly prices, right? If as long as they're cooperating. But why doesn't it happen? Well, for one thing, in a lot of places, it's not legal, so you can't really do it. But international ones do exist. So, like I said, OPEC, and that's not under the United States jurisdiction. Why else? Why we not do it? Well, it's hard to come to an agreement, right? So one country might be in a better position than other countries, and they may not want to play ball, right? They might want to do what they want to do. They also have strong incentives to cheat, right? So remember, the whole deal is they want to act like a monopolist. Well, if you're acting like a monopolist, what you're doing is you're reducing the amount of quantity that's in the market, and so you're getting this higher price. Well, if you've got this incentive that is an individual country or individual firm to just sell a little bit more, right, at that nice high price, like they're not going to catch you, right? A lot of times they might, and that might not turn out very well. So I'm going to skip past this slide. So that's pretty much it for monopolies. I just basically want you to know what a monopoly is, why they form, be able to figure out what the monopoly price is, figure out what the monopoly quantity is. So we find out the quantity from where marginal cost, marginal revenue equal each other, and at that quantity we go to the demand curve and find the price from there. Should be able to calculate welfare under the monopoly. So there's going to be the deadweight loss, which I showed you. The producer surplus and consumer surplus, we're going to calculate that the same way, right? We're going to have this new price, which is the monopoly price. Area under that monopoly price above the marginal cost curve, that's going to be our producer surplus. And under the demand curve but above that price is going to be our consumer surplus. You should also be able to find the profit as well. We should know the different types of price discrimination and some of the basic calculations there. Again, those are super basic. You're not going to have to do any more than what I just kind of went over there. So I wouldn't beat yourself up too much over those. I wouldn't worry too much about that part. And be able to give prices to these different things that we're doing where applicable. Again, it's not going to be anything super complicated, I don't think. All right, so that's pretty much it for Monopoly. I'm going to post this, and then I'm going to post a homework, and I'm going to post the reading for this. So like all of our lectures, we're going to have a reading that's going to pretty much cover what I've been talking about, but it's also going to have some more example problems. So I need you to read those. Read those before you start the homework, and that'll probably make things a little bit easier. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. We do have two office hours really before the homework's going to be due, but don't wait until the last one because that's going to be right before it. Right? I want you to have some time. So try to maybe work on this weekend, and let me know if you have any questions. So thank you very much.